Welcome to the One in the Many. My name is Arshak Benlian. My purpose with the One in the Many podcast is to explore the process of integration as developmentally formative and therapeutically corrective factor in human psychology. The One in the Many is the study of how conscious life differentiates identity, integrates relation, regulates itself under constraint, and sustains direction through time. Subscribe to the One in the Many podcast and connect with me by writing to abenlian@oneinthemany.net. Human cognition unfolds through two intimately related, yet functionally distinct integrative processes: conscious integration and subconscious integration. Both are genuinely integrative, yet they operate at different levels of awareness, with different causal roles in the development of knowledge, skill, and identity. Understanding their distinction clarifies how volition shapes development and how continuity of self is preserved across time. Conscious integration is the active work of awareness. It is the process by which the mind deliberately organizes perceptual and conceptual units into coherent structure. Through attention, differentiation, abstraction, and logical validation, the individual forms stable relationships among units of knowledge. These relationships become the basis for judgment, decision, planning, and creative production. Conscious integration is therefore epistemically directive. It determines what is taken as relevant, what is considered true, and what is pursued as valuable. Subconscious integration, by contrast, operates beneath focal awareness. It does not originate conceptual structure, but stabilizes and refines structures already formed through conscious effort and experience. Through repetition, reinforcement, emotional weighing, and neuroplasticity, patterns become more efficient, more reliable, and less metabolically costly to execute. The subconscious does not deliberate, it consolidates. It does not choose principles, it automatizes their consequences. This distinction is evident in the development of motor coordination. The infant is born with limited differentiation of perceptual and motor units. Movement is initially diffuse, poorly calibrated, and largely governed by autonomic processes. Reflexive responses dominate behavior because integration density is low. The nervous system has not yet established sufficiently differentiated units that can be reliably integrated into coordinated action. The infant therefore reacts to the environment primarily through subcortical and autonomic mechanisms. These responses are adaptive but not volitional. Through repeated interaction with the environment, sensory motor patterns gradually stabilize. Neural pathways become increasingly differentiated, enabling more precise integrations. The child begins to grasp objects intentionally, then manipulate them, then coordinate complex sequences of action. Each step requires conscious effort initially, but repetition progressively transfers control to subconscious procedural systems. What was once effortful becomes fluid. The structure established consciously becomes stabilized subconsciously. The same pattern governs intellectual development. A concept first requires effortful differentiation of relevant characteristics and their integration into a unified mental unit. The individual must actively discriminate, compare, and validate. Once the conceptual structure is repeatedly used, its application becomes increasingly automatic. Recognition accelerates, cognitive load decreases. What was once a deliberate act becomes an available capacity. The subconscious preserves the result of conscious work. We may therefore say that conscious integration builds structure, whereas subconscious integration stabilizes structure. Conscious integration increases the density of relationships among units of knowledge. Subconscious integration increases the efficiency with which those relationships are activated. One expands the architecture of mind, the other secures its continuity. Neurobiologically, this distinction corresponds to interaction among multiple brain systems. Conscious integration relies heavily on cortical networks associated with executive function, working memory, and attentional control. Subconscious integration relies more strongly on distributed systems involved in procedural learning, emotional conditioning, and autonomic regulation. The basal ganglia, cerebellum, and limbic structures contribute to the stabilization of patterns through repetition and reinforcement, while autonomic processes regulate physiological conditions that support learning and performance. Importantly, subconscious integration is not merely mechanical storage. It actively shapes the field within which conscious integration occurs. Emotional signals, somatic markers, the procedural expectations influence salience detection and attentional allocation. Subconscious processes bias what is noticed, what feels significant, and what appears plausible. They therefore condition the material available for further conscious integration. The relation is reciprocal. Conscious integration reorganizes subconscious structure, and subconscious structure influences future conscious integration. The developmental significance of this reciprocity is profound. Without conscious integration, no new structure would emerge. The individual would remain confined to inherited reflexes and conditioned responses. Without subconscious integration, no structure would stabilize sufficiently to support complex functioning. Each action would require full deliberative effort. Learning would not accumulate. Identity would fragment into isolated moments of effort without continuity. The alternation between conscious and subconscious integration allows the organism to preserve past integration while remaining open to new differentiation. This alternation also enables the progressive expansion of volitional capacity. As integration density increases, the individual gains greater precision in perception, greater coherence in judgment, and greater freedom in action. Volition becomes more effective because it operates upon a more structured field. Error detection likewise manifests differently across the two levels. At the conscious level, error appears as contradiction or logical inconsistency. The individual recognizes conflict among propositions or between belief and observation. At the subconscious level, error appears as tension, hesitation, or affective disturbance. A vague sense of unease may indicate misalignment among implicitly learned patterns. Conscious reflection may then identify and resolve the discrepancy, producing new integration that later stabilizes subconsciously. The subconscious does not replace consciousness. It expands its reach across time. It preserves the results of prior integrations, allowing conscious effort to move forward rather than repeatedly reconstructing foundations already established. Habit, skill, and intuition are not alternatives to reason, but its temporal extensions. We may articulate the relationship this way. Conscious integration is the volitional structuring of meaning. Subconscious integration is the automatic stabilization of structure. Or more precisely, consciousness integrates by understanding. The subconscious integrates by habituation. Together, they form a unified developmental process in which structure is created, consolidated, and progressively refined. Through this process, the individual moves from diffuse responsiveness toward increasingly coherent self-direction. The growth of integration density increases the capacity for purposeful action, while subconscious stabilization preserves continuity of identity across time. The architecture of mind, therefore, depends upon both processes. Conscious integration generates the order of knowledge. Subconscious integration preserves the order achieved. Their interaction makes possible the progressive realization of coherence between perception, understanding, and action. The living expression of the one in the many. Human energy, when examined through the lens of consciousness, reveals itself not as a single, undifferentiated force, but as a structured continuum of functional states through which work is performed upon reality and within the self. Energy in the psychological sense is not merely expenditure, not merely intensity. It is the capacity of an organism to effect change through organized activity. To understand human development, learning, and performance, one must distinguish how energy operates across both conscious and subconscious domains, and how each may function actively or passively while still performing measurable work. The common intuition that activity is energetic and passivity is inert fails to capture the deeper structure of the mind. In reality, both conscious and subconscious processes engage in work, but they do so at different levels of accessibility to volition and at different degrees of structural visibility. Consciousness performs work explicitly through directed attention, deliberate differentiation, and intentional integration. The subconscious performs work implicitly through consolidation, regulation, and automatization of previously differentiated structures. Together, they form a unified system in which energy is continuously transformed from effortful activity into stable capacity. The most effortful and metabolically expansive form of psychological work occurs in conscious active energy. Here, the individual differentiates, discriminates, and selects among alternatives. This form of energy is required whenever new structure must be formed, when learning a language, mastering a craft, solving a problem, or reorganizing one's understanding of reality. At this stage, the nervous system exhibits heightened metabolic demand. Neural networks are recruited extensively, errors are frequent, and performance is slow. Yet this high expenditure is not wasteful. It represents the initial investment required to produce structured organization. Conscious active work generates the distinctions that later become the building blocks of knowledge and skill. It is the phase in which the individual confronts complexity directly and begins the process of transforming the unfamiliar into the intelligible. Complementing this mode is conscious passive energy, a state often misunderstood because it appears outwardly inactive. Yet receptive awareness performs a distinct form of work, the integration of context. In this state, the individual does not impose structure upon reality, but allows relationships among elements to become perceptible. Observation, contemplation, and reflective awareness allow patterns to emerge without the immediate pressure of execution. Insight often arises not at the moment of forceful effort, but in periods of receptive attention, when the mind is sufficiently quiet to register coherence among differentiated elements. This form of passivity is not inert. It is a sensitive openness that permits integration to occur with minimal distortion. The energy expenditure is moderate, yet the yield in structural clarity can be high. As differentiation and contextual integration accumulate, processes gradually migrate below the threshold of focal awareness. Subconscious active energy becomes dominant in skilled performance. Actions that once required deliberate control become fluid and rapid. The pianist no longer calculates each finger movement. The driver no longer consciously processes every micro adjustment of steering and balance. Neural circuits have reorganized to permit execution with minimal metabolic cost per unit of output. Automatization does not eliminate work, rather, it compresses it. The work is still being performed, but the structural organization achieved earlier allows the same outcome to be produced with greater efficiency and stability. The organism conserves energy precisely because integration has increased the reliability of response. Beneath even this level operates subconscious passive energy, the most continuous yet least visible form of work. Here the organism maintains, repairs, and refines its internal organization without conscious direction. Memory consolidation during sleep, synaptic pruning, immune regulation, emotional recalibration, and autonomic stabilization all occur largely outside awareness. The individual does not wield these processes moment to moment, yet they are indispensable for the persistence of identity across time. Without these background integrations, conscious effort would produce only temporary effects. The structural continuity of the self depends upon processes that operate below the level of immediate volitional control, but nonetheless perform indispensable work. Taken together, These four functional states form a dynamic cycle of energetic transformation. Conscious active effort differentiates the world into meaningful units. Conscious passive receptivity integrates those units within broader context. Subconscious active execution applies integrated structure effectively in action. Subconscious passive consolidation stabilizes and refines the structures so formed. Development consists in the progressive transfer of work from effortful conscious control toward efficient subconscious organization. What is first performed slowly and deliberately becomes rapid and reliable. The density of integration increases while the marginal cost of performance decreases. This cycle can be observed in every domain of human activity. The infant learning to coordinate movement must invest immense conscious effort in differentiation of motor signals, yet over time, walking becomes automatic. The student grappling with abstract principles must exert intense focus to understand relationships among concepts, yet later those same relationships become intuitive. The craftsperson initially relies upon explicit rules, but ultimately embodies those rules in tacit skill. Each transformation reflects a reorganization of energetic expenditure across levels of awareness. Energy, therefore, is not merely consumed, it is structured. Work is performed not only in overt action, but also in receptive integration and subconscious consolidation. The passive dimensions of mind do not represent absence of activity, but rather activity operating below the threshold of immediate awareness. They allow continuity of structure across time, ensuring that differentiation achieved through effort becomes stable capacity. Without conscious passive processes, conscious effort would dissipate. Without subconscious passive processes, conscious effort would dissipate as quickly as it arises. Without conscious active differentiation, subconscious processes would lack structure to consolidate. Human development may therefore be understood as the progressive harmonization of these energetic states. The more integrated the individual becomes, the more efficiently energy flows between conscious and subconscious domains. Effort becomes more precise, receptivity becomes more sensitive, automatization becomes more reliable, and consolidation becomes more stable. Psychological maturity is not the elimination of effort, but the optimization of its distribution. In this sense, the differentiation of energy states reveals the underlying unity. All forms of psychological work contribute to the organization of experience into coherent structure. Consciousness directs, the subconscious sustains, and both together form the continuous process by which the individual transforms potential into capacity. Through this ongoing cycle, energy becomes not merely the capacity to act, but the capacity to become. Man understands balance most deeply when he recognizes that life persists only through the continuous expenditure of energy against the universal tendency toward disorder. Every organized system exists under the constant pressure of entropy, the statistical drift toward dispersion, incoherence, and loss of structure. Balance is not merely an aesthetic or ethical metaphor. It is the condition under which order can be maintained at all. It is the measured relation between energy expenditure and structural preservation, between effort and continuity, between the activity of consciousness and the stabilizing work of the subconscious. Entropy does not destroy systems abruptly. It dissolves them gradually through small increments of disorganization accumulating over time. A structure left unattended deteriorates. A skill left unpracticed weakens. A relationship left unintegrated fragments. The same principle governs physiology, psychology, and culture alike. Life must constantly import energy and direct it purposefully in order to maintain identity across time. Balance represents the dynamic regulation of energy such that organization is sustained despite the continuous pull toward disorder. From the perspective of human functioning, this regulation occurs through the coordinated activity of consciousness and subconsciousness. Consciousness directs energy deliberately. It focuses attention, resolves contradictions, evaluates alternatives, and initiates new integrations. This activity is metabolically costly. Neural tissue consumes disproportionate energy precisely because integration requires effort. New patterns must be formed, errors must be corrected, and uncertainty must be reduced. When man learns a new skill, solves a problem, or reorganizes his understanding, he expends significant energy because he is restructuring the relations among elements of experience. Conscious activity is therefore the principal anti-entropic force in psychological development. It is the means by which disorder is transformed into structured meaning. Yet conscious effort alone would be insufficient for life. If every action required deliberate control, the energetic burden would overwhelm the organism. The subconscious provides the complementary function. It conserves energy by stabilizing integrations once they have been achieved. Habits, motor coordination, language fluency, emotional dispositions, and perceptual expectations are all stored as structured patterns that require minimal additional energy to maintain. The subconscious therefore functions as accumulated order, a reservoir of prior integrations that reduces the cost of future action. What was once effortful becomes automatic. What required attention becomes background stability. Balance emerges from the relation between these two modes of operation. Consciousness expends energy to create order. The subconscious preserves that order efficiently. When this relation is properly calibrated, the organism achieves increasing complexity at decreasing marginal cost. Development becomes energetically sustainable because each successful integration reduces the energy required to maintain coherence in the future. In this sense, learning is not merely the acquisition of knowledge, but the transformation of energy expenditure into structural economy. Psychological entropy appears wherever integration is insufficient. Confusion, contradiction, chronic anxiety, and fragmentation of purpose all increase energetic demand because the system lacks efficient organization. The individual must continually exert effort simply to maintain functional stability. Decision fatigue, attentional exhaustion, and emotional volatility as symptoms of excessive energetic cost resulting from insufficient integration. Where order is weak, energy is dissipated, compensating for instability. Conversely, excessive rigidity represents another form of imbalance. When energy is conserved without sufficient openness to new integration, the system loses adaptive capacity. The individual becomes resistant to correction, unable to incorporate new information, and increasingly vulnerable to disruption when reality diverges from expectation. Balance, therefore, cannot mean static equilibrium. It must be dynamic proportionality, sufficient stability to preserve identity, and sufficient flexibility to permit development. Human maturation reflects increasing efficiency in this anti-entropic economy. The infant expends enormous energy to perform simple coordinated movements because integration density is low. Gradually, repeated interaction with reality stabilizes neural pathways, allowing action to become smoother, faster, and less energetically costly. The same developmental pattern appears in intellectual, emotional, and moral domains. With increasing integration, perception becomes clearer, decisions become more proportionate, and motivation becomes more stable because less energy is wasted compensating for disorder. Consciousness therefore functions as the director of energetic investment, determining where effort should be applied to generate greater structural coherence. Attention is the instrument through which neural energy is allocated. What is attended to is strengthened. What is ignored decays. Over time, patterns of attention shape the architecture of the nervous system itself. Integration becomes embodied as structure, allowing future action to proceed with greater economy. The subconscious complements this process by maintaining continuity. It regulates physiological equilibrium, emotional tone, and procedural knowledge without requiring constant conscious supervision. This background regulation represents the cumulative success of prior integrations. It stabilizes identity across time, allowing consciousness to focus on novelty rather than maintenance alone. Balance, understood in this light, is the optimal distribution of energy between the formation of new order and the preservation of existing order. Too much expenditure without consolidation leads to exhaustion. Too little expenditure leads to stagnation and increasing vulnerability to entropy. The mature system learns to regulate the rhythm between effort and recovery, exploration and consolidation, differentiation and integration. Thus, balance is neither rest nor motion alone, but the coordinated alternation between them. It is the pattern through which life offsets entropy while increasing complexity. Through conscious direction of energy and subconscious preservation of structure, man achieves continuity of identity across change. Balance becomes the experiential recognition that order is not given once and for all, but must be continually renewed through intelligent expenditure of energy. In this sense, balance is the psychological expression of life's fundamental condition, that persistence requires work, and that work, when properly directed, transforms energy into meaning. Man does not encounter time as he encounters color, sound, or texture. Time is not presented to the senses as a discrete object among other objects. Rather, time is understood through the awareness of change. the movement of a shadow across the ground, the unfolding of a melody, the growth of a child, the fading of memory. Each reveals that existence is not static but dynamic. From these recognitions of change arises the abstraction of time. Time is therefore not perceived directly but inferred through the integration of successive states of reality. To understand time is to recognize that things are not merely what they are, but that they become. Consciousness, in its function of awareness, must retain what has been and anticipate what may be in order to understand what is. Memory preserves prior states. Attention apprehends the present. Anticipation projects possible futures. Through the integration of these functions, man forms the continuity of experience. Time is thus the structural relation among these dimensions of awareness. It is the measure of change as grasped by consciousness capable of relating the before and the after. In this sense, time belongs neither exclusively to the external world, nor exclusively to subjective feeling. It is the relational dimension through which consciousness apprehends existence as a process. If reality were frozen, time would have no meaning. If consciousness retained nothing and anticipated nothing, sequence would dissolve into disconnected moments. Time is therefore the condition under which identity can persist through change. It is the medium in which continuity becomes intelligible. Man differentiates time in multiple ways, each reflecting a different level of integration. Physical time is measured through regularities in nature, the rotation of the earth, the oscillation of atoms, the periodic motion of celestial bodies. These recurring patterns allow for standardized measurement, making coordination of activity possible across individuals and cultures. Physical time provides the quantitative framework within which action can be organized. It expresses the stability of natural law. Biological time reveals a different dimension. Living organisms do not merely exist in time, they embody rhythmic processes that regulate survival. Circadian cycles, metabolic rhythms, growth phases, and developmental windows illustrate that life unfolds through structured temporal patterns. The organism must coordinate internal processes with environmental conditions. The timing of development is not arbitrary. There are periods in which neural pathways form more readily, periods in which learning occurs with greater plasticity, periods in which energy is allocated toward growth, reproduction, or preservation. Biological time expresses the dynamic effort of life to maintain order in the face of entropy. Psychological time introduces yet another differentiation. The experienced passage of time is not constant. A moment of danger may seem prolonged. An hour of absorption may seem brief. Attention, emotion, and value alter the felt density of time. When experience is rich with meaning, temporal duration appears compressed. When experience lacks engagement, duration appears extended. Psychological time therefore reflects the relation between consciousness and value. It measures not merely how long something lasts, but how much integration occurs within that duration. The perception of time becomes a reflection of the degree of coherence between the individual and his activity. Developmental time represents the transformation of the individual across the arc of life. Infancy, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and maturity are not merely chronological markers, but stages of increasing integration. The infant possesses sensitivity to stimuli but limited coordination. The child gradually differentiates perception and action. The adolescent integrates identity across expanding context. The adult refines purpose and responsibility. Mature adulthood consolidates experience into wisdom. Development reveals that time is required for integration to stabilize. Neural networks must form. Habits must consolidate. Values must be tested across context. Identity emerges as the continuity of integrations accumulated across time. Operational time expresses a deliberate allocation of duration toward chosen ends. Planning, scheduling, prioritization, and investment reflects the recognition that time is finite and must therefore be directed. Time becomes the medium through which potential is transformed into achievement. Every goal implies a temporal structure: preparation, execution, refinement, completion. The management of time becomes the management of integration. To misuse time is to fragment effort. To structure time is to coordinate energy toward value. Through these differentiations, man recognizes that time is not merely something that passes, it is something within which development occurs. Integration cannot be instantaneous because complexity requires structure, and structure requires stabilization. Learning requires repetition. Mastery requires refinement. Identity requires consistency across changing circumstances. Each integration builds upon prior integrations, forming hierarchical organization of knowledge and ability. Time is therefore the dimension in which the self becomes increasingly coherent. Time also introduces limitation. The finitude of duration imposes selectivity. Because attention and energy are limited, priorities must be established. Limitation is not merely a restriction, but a condition of value formation. Without temporal limitation, there would be no urgency, no need for choice, no hierarchy of importance. Time creates the necessity of evaluation, and evaluation directs action. Through this process, meaning emerges. Meaning is not independent of time. It is generated through the selection of what is worth sustaining across time. At the biological level, the passage of time reflects the ongoing effort to maintain organization against the tendency toward disorder. Living systems must continuously expend energy to preserve structure. Memory formation requires biochemical change. Skill acquisition requires neural adaptation. Emotional stability requires regulatory integration across physiological systems. Time thus reveals the continuous work required to sustain identity. This integration occurs when the rate of loss exceeds the rate of integration. Development occurs when integration accumulates in stable form. The self may therefore be understood as temporally extended integration. Personal identity persists not as a static entity, but as a continuity of structured change. Each decision, each insight, each effort to understand contributes to the architecture of the individual. Through time, isolated experiences become connected. Through connection, patterns emerge. Through patterns, meaning stabilizes. the individual becomes the history of his integrations. Time is neither merely an external container nor an illusion of perception. It is the dimension through which existence becomes intelligible to consciousness and through which consciousness becomes effective in existence. It allows potential to become actual, possibility to become structure, intention to become achievement. Without time, there could be no learning, no memory, no responsibility, no progress. The development of the self depends upon the accumulation of integrations across duration. To understand time is to understand that becoming is not separate from being. Identity is not negated by change, but expressed through ordered change. Time is the medium through which the one emerges from the many, through which multiplicity is organized into coherence, and through which the individual gradually transforms possibility into actuality. Time becomes intelligible to men not merely as succession, but as the measurable interval within which integration either occurs or fails to occur. When time is viewed from the standpoint of development, it reveals itself as more than duration. It becomes a metric of structure. Time is the dimension within which scattered elements either remain juxtaposed or become unified into coherent order. The distinction between mere passage and meaningful development lies in the density of integration achieved per unit of time. Integration density may be understood as the degree of structured coherence formed within a given temporal interval. Two individuals may spend the same number of hours exposed to similar material, yet emerge with vastly different levels of understanding. The difference is not located in time as quantity, but in time as organized effort. Time alone does not produce development. Integration produces development. And time measures the rate at which integration accumulates. If experience is considered as a flow of differentiated units of information, then integration is the process that binds these units into progressively more stable structures of meaning. The temporal dimension allows this binding to occur sequentially, hierarchically, and recursively. Each integration reduces internal contradiction, increases predictive reliability, and improves efficiency of response. The accumulation of such integration across time forms the architecture of knowledge, skill, and identity. From this perspective, time functions as a common denominator through which the growth of order may be compared. A given hour may produce little structural change, or it may produce a significant reorganization of understanding. What distinguishes these outcomes is the degree to which attention is directed. Differentiation is accurate, and integration is successful. Time, therefore, reveals the rate at which potential is converted into structured capacity. Integration density increases when experience is organized according to relevant relations. When a learner perceives the governing principle connecting multiple observations, the quantity of retained structure increases while the required effort for recall decreases. The structure becomes more compressible, more transferable, and more generative. In such moments, the individual experiences an acceleration of development. Time appears to yield more because integration has increased the informational coherence contained within the same duration. Conversely, when experience remains fragmented, time appears to pass without cumulative development. Effort expended without integrative organization dissipates energy without producing stable structure. information remains isolated, requiring repeated effort to retrieve and apply. The apparent expenditure of time fails to produce proportional growth because integration density remains low. The nervous system itself reflects this principle. Repeated activation of neural pathways leads to structural consolidation through protein synthesis, synaptic strengthening, and myelination. With increasing integration, response becomes more rapid and less energetically costly. What initially required conscious effort becomes automatic. This transformation represents an increase in integration density, more reliable function achieved in less time with less metabolic expenditure. Developmental progression across the lifespan likewise demonstrates increasing integration density. The infant requires expended time to coordinate perception and movement because neural integrations remain sparse. The adult performs complex actions repeatedly because layers of prior integration provide stable structure upon which further integration may build. Expertise compresses time because prior integrations increase the efficiency of new integrations. Time becomes the dimension in which the relationship between energy expenditure and structural coherence becomes visible. Integration reduces entropy locally by organizing experience into stable relations. The more coherent the structure, the less effort required to maintain it. High integration density therefore corresponds to high economy of cognitive energy. Learning accelerates because new information finds an already differentiated context into which it may be placed. The subjective experience of time reflects this process. When integration is occurring effectively, attention remains stable and directed. Distraction decreases because elements are experienced as meaningfully related. Psychological time appears compressed because the mind is engaged in productive organization. Conversely, when integration fails, attention disperses, effort increases, and time appears elongated. The individual senses expenditure without proportional structure. Time also introduces irreversibility. Each moment presents conditions that cannot be fully replicated. Development therefore depends on the capacity to integrate within available temporal windows. Biological plasticity decreases with age, yet accumulated integrations compensate by providing structured framework for further learning. The individual increasingly relies on prior integrations to guide the selection of new integrations. The trajectory of development is therefore shaped by the pattern of integration density achieved across time. From this standpoint, the value of time is not measured solely by duration, but by transformation. The same quantity of time may produce minimal change or profound reorganization. Time becomes valuable when it is structured toward the integration of meaningful relations. The direction of attention determines whether time produces accumulation or dissipation. The self may therefore be understood as the temporal record of integration density. Identity stabilizes when integrations reinforce one another across context and durations. Fragmentation occurs when integrations conflict or remain isolated. Development reflects increasing coherence among values, knowledge, and action across time. The individual becomes progressively more capable of organizing complexity because prior integrations reduce uncertainty in new contexts. Time functions as the metric through which the process of becoming becomes measurable. It reveals the rate at which order is constructed from multiplicity. Integration density expresses the concentration of meaningful structure achieved within duration. Through time, the individual transforms dispersed experience into organized identity. Through integration, duration becomes development. The significance of time in human life, therefore, lies not merely in its passage, but in its capacity to reveal the degree to which existence has been organized into meaningful structure. Time measures the growth of coherence. It reveals whether change has produced fragmentation or unity. It records the history of integration through which the many become one. Up to this point, I have discussed consciousness, energy, balance, and time, and their interdependence in psychological development and function of the self. Now I want to turn to what makes consciousness, energy, balance, and time fundamental to psychology. To identify the axiomatic fundamentals of psychology is to ask what must be presupposed before any psychological phenomenon can occur. An axiom is not inferred from prior propositions. It is implicit in every act of observation, every judgment, every experience. If psychology is the science of the process by which a living organism becomes aware, evaluates, chooses, and acts, then its axioms must be those conditions without which awareness, evaluation, choice, and action would be impossible. When examined at this level of irreducibility, four fundamentals emerge: consciousness, energy, balance, and time. Each is presupposed in every psychological event, and none can be removed without dissolving the very subject matter psychology seeks to study. Consciousness is axiomatic because psychology concerns awareness. Every perception, memory, emotion, or decision presupposes a faculty capable of registering difference. Even the denial of consciousness requires consciousness, for one must be aware to assert anything at all. Psychology cannot begin without acknowledging the existence of a subject for whom phenomena appear. Consciousness is therefore not one topic among many in psychology, it is the precondition of all psychological topics. It is the field in which distinctions are made, relations are recognized, and meanings are formed. Energy is axiomatic because no psychological process occurs without expenditure. Neurosignaling requires metabolic activity. Attention consumes physiological resources. Effort manifests as measurable work within the organism. The brain, though small in mass, consumes a disproportionate share of the body's energy precisely because the operations of awareness, learning, and volition are metabolically demanding. Without energy, no perception could stabilize, no memory could consolidate, no action could be initiated. Energy is therefore the enabling condition that allows psychological processes to occur at all. Balance is axiomatic because the organism must maintain functional stability to persist long enough to know, learn, and act. Living systems continuously exchange matter and energy with their environment, yet must preserve their structural integrity across these exchanges. Psychological life reflects this regulatory requirement in emotional calibration, attentional control, cognitive coherence, and behavioral coordination. Too little stability produces fragmentation. Too much rigidity prevents adaptation. The mind must continually regulate competing demands, maintaining proportionality among impulses, perceptions, and values. Without balance, the continuity required for identity and agency could not exist. Time is axiomatic because psychology studies processes rather than static states. Learning, development, memory formation, skill acquisitions, and identity formation all unfold sequentially. Knowledge accumulates, habits stabilize, values mature, and personality takes form across duration. Without time, no experience could be retained, no change could occur, and no development could be observed. Psychology therefore presupposes temporal extension as the dimension within which integration becomes possible. These four fundamentals arise from the logical structure of psychological inquiry itself. Any attempt to describe perception, emotion, motivation, cognition, or personality implicitly invokes awareness operating through expenditure regulated toward stability across duration. Each psychological concept can be understood as a specification or configuration of these underlying conditions. Emotion reflects changes in energetic allocation within consciousness relative to perceived balance across time. Memory reflects the persistence of structured neuroorganization across temporal intervals. Attention reflects the selective distribution of energy within the field of awareness to maintain coherence among competing demands. Motivation reflects the mobilization of energy toward anticipated states of improved balance or value realization in the future. Even identity itself reflects the continuity of organized consciousness maintained across time through regulated expenditure of energy. The recognition of consciousness, energy, balance, and time as axiomatic fundamentals therefore arises from examining what must be present whenever psychological phenomena are present. Each expresses an indispensable dimension of the living process as it becomes aware of itself and its world. Psychology, understood at its foundation, studies how a living being maintains organized awareness through regulated expenditure across duration. Consciousness provides the condition of awareness. Energy provides the capacity for work. Balance provides the condition of persistence. Time provides the dimension of development. Because each is presupposed in every act of knowing, valuing, and acting, they function as the axiomatic fundamentals of psychological life. If consciousness, energy, balance, and time are indeed axiomatic, then their significance does not lie merely in their independent identification, but in the recognition that together they form a single functional structure. Psychology, viewed from the perspective of integration, becomes the study of how these four variables interact to produce increasingly ordered identity across development. An axiom establishes what must be presupposed. A structure shows how what must be presupposed actually operates. The mind does not encounter consciousness, energy, balance, and time as isolated categories. Rather, every psychological act is an event in which all four are simultaneously present. Every perception requires metabolic expenditure. Every expenditure must be regulated. Every regulation unfolds across duration. Every duration is experienced only through awareness. Thus, the four fundamentals form not a list, but a system. Psychological existence may therefore be understood as the progressive integration of differentiated contents within consciousness through the expenditure of energy regulated by balance across time. I'll repeat that. Psychological existence may therefore be understood as the progressive integration of differentiated contents within consciousness through the expenditure of energy regulated by balance across time. This formulation expresses the minimal architecture required for any learning, adaptation, valuation, or act of volition. Consciousness provides the locus in which differentiation becomes possible. To be conscious is to register distinctions. Figure from ground, self from world, relevant from irrelevant. Without differentiation, there is no structure upon which integration may operate. Yet differentiation alone produces multiplicity without unity. Consciousness must also relate, synthesize, and order. The act of understanding is therefore not merely the passive reception of stimuli, but the active organization of perceptual and conceptual elements into coherent patterns. In this sense, consciousness is the field in which the many are related as one. Integration increases the internal coherence of the field. Disintegration fragments it. Misintegration distorts it. The development of consciousness may therefore be understood as the increasing capacity to hold greater multiplicity within a unified structure without loss of clarity. No integration occurs without cost. Neurosignaling requires electrochemical gradients. Attention requires metabolic allocation. Effort requires psychological expenditure. Every act of concentration, every act of emotional regulation, every act of conceptual synthesis draws upon biological resources. Energy, therefore, represents the capacity for psychological work. But work alone does not guarantee order. Energy may produce chaos as easily as structure. Anxiety, agitation, impulsivity, and cognitive overload demonstrate that energy without organization increases entropy rather than reducing it. Integration may therefore be understood as the process by which energy expenditure produces increasing order per unit of effort. As integration increases, the same psychological operations require less energy. Habits become fluid, perception becomes rapid, judgment becomes more precise. The self becomes more efficient in transforming energy into meaningful structure. Every living system must maintain stability while undergoing change. Balance does not imply status, it implies proportion. A system that cannot adjust collapses under novelty. A system that never stabilizes cannot accumulate structure. Psychological balance manifests as proportional emotional response, cognitive coherence, behavioral coordination, and continuity of identity. Balance regulates the distribution of energy within consciousness across time. Too little regulation produces disintegration. Too much rigidity produces stagnation. Optimal balance permits adaptation without loss of identity. It allows the individual to maintain direction while incorporating new information. Balance is therefore the condition under which integration can persist. Integration cannot occur instantaneously. Structure emerges sequentially. Learning requires repetition. Competence requires consolidation. Identity requires continuity. Time provides the dimension in which experience accumulates and organization becomes increasingly refined. Without time, no habit could form, no skill could stabilize, no personality could emerge, and no value hierarchy could mature. Time therefore functions as the measure of integration density. The degree to which order increases across successive moments determines the trajectory of development. A life may be understood as a temporal pattern of integrations. When the four fundamentals are considered as a single system, psychology may be described in formal terms as the dynamic relationship among them. We may express integration density conceptually as integration density approximate organized conscious structure produced per unit of energy, maintained in balance, accumulated across time. Or symbolically, integration density proportional to, in parentheses, C times E times B divided by T with a -1 exponent, where C, clarity and coherence of consciousness, E is the effective energy expenditure, B, degree of regulatory balance, and T, duration across which structure persists. Time appears inversely in the denominator because integration density increases when structure persists longer relative to the energy required to produce it. High integration density implies stable order achieved with relatively lower energy across extended duration. Low integration density implies high expenditure with minimal persistence of structure. Psychological development may therefore be understood as an increase in the ratio of structured coherence to energetic cost across time. The developmental arc of the individual illustrates this relationship clearly. The infant possesses consciousness but limited differentiation. Energy expenditure is high, coordination unstable, balance fragile. Movements are inefficient because integrations are not yet consolidated. Through repetition across time, neural pathways stabilize. Energy expenditure decreases for the same action. Balance improves. Conscious differentiation becomes more precise. Walking, speaking, reading, reasoning, all demonstrate increasing integration density. The same principle applies at higher levels. Moral judgment, scientific reasoning, artistic creation, technical mastery, interpersonal understanding. Each domain exhibits increasing coherence with decreasing unnecessary expenditure across time. Thus, development may be described as the progressive increase of integration density. Psychological disturbance may be interpreted as disruption in the functional relationship among the four variables. Disintegration may involve fragmented consciousness, misdirected energy, imbalanced regulation, temporal discontinuity of identity. Examples include chronic anxiety, high energy expenditure with unstable balance across time, depression, diminished energy available to sustain conscious integration, trauma, disruption of temporal continuity and regulatory stability, impulsivity, rapid energy discharge without sufficient integrated structure. Each illustrates how disturbance arises when one or more variables deviate from proportion relative to the others. Health, therefore, may be understood as functional proportionality among the four. If psychology is to become fully systematic, it must identify its irreducible variables and the lawful relations among them. Consciousness, energy, balance, and time satisfy the criteria for axiomatic status because they are presupposed in every psychological observation. They cannot be reduced to prior psychological concepts. They generate explanatory continuity across domains. They allow diverse phenomena to be understood within a unified structure. Learning, motivation, emotion, memory, habit formation, identity development, creativity, resilience. Each may be described as a configuration of the four fundamentals. The four axioms function as primitives of a generative system. Integration names the process that relates the four fundamentals into a developmental trajectory. Integration organizes consciousness. Integration economizes energy. Integration stabilizes balance. Integration accumulates across time. The four fundamentals define the conditions of possibility, while integration defines the direction of development. The mind becomes increasingly itself through the progressive ordering of experience. Identity is not given fully formed. It is achieved through successive integrations that increase coherence across time. Psychology may therefore be grounded on four axiomatic fundamentals: consciousness as the field in which differentiation occurs, energy as the capacity through which work is performed, balance as the regulator that preserves order, time as the dimension across which structure accumulates. Their functional unity gives rise to integration density, the measure of organized coherence achieved per unit of energy across duration. Human development is the progressive increase of this density. The self becomes more unified, more efficient, more stable, and more capable of creating value. Thus, the four axioms do not merely describe psychological activity, they define the structural conditions under which the one becomes integrated across the many. This is the one in the many. The principle of life is the process of integration from a single cell to an ideal human being. The story of life unfolds through integration, from a single percept to a library of knowledge. Through virtue, reason, honesty, independence, selfishness, productivity, you set your values, purpose, to achieve self-esteem and happiness. Through time and energy, from induction to integration to reduction, the smallest particle unifies matter, and the highest purpose unifies your life. You, the one in the many, matter. May you integrate your life with value-driven days.